she was homeless, invisible until she dove into traffic to save a stranger's child. The next day, she woke up in a mansion, and days later, found herself named in the billionaire father's will. But what if her past and his dead wife's secrets were the real reason she was brought there? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The sidewalk was cold beneath Layla's thin blanket, the chill of dawn sneaking through cardboard seams. She tucked her arms closer to her chest, listening to the city stir, the click of high heels, the hiss of espresso machines, the muffled jazz from the bakery across the street. People passed her without looking, as they always did. She had become part of the landscape, just another shadow pressed against concrete. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's discarded muffin. Across the street, a woman pushed a stroller with one hand and typed furiously on her phone with the other. Layla barely noticed, until the child beside the stroller suddenly bolted forward. A tiny boy, no older than 4, darting past his mother and toward the curb. Layla sat up, instinct screaming. The mother screamed too. But the boy didn't stop. A green light flashed. Traffic surged. "Stop," the mother cried, dropping her phone, stumbling. Layla didn't think, she ran. Her feet slapped the pavement as horns blared, tires screeched, a man shouted. She lunged forward just as the child stepped into the street. A truck swerved, a taxi braked too late. Layla grabbed the boy around the waist and spun, shielding him with her body. They hit the ground hard. Wind knocked from her chest, her elbows scraped raw on the asphalt. Silence. Then gasps. A woman screamed. A horn continued to blare as a delivery van jerked to a halt, inches away. The boy sobbed in her arms, clutching her neck with trembling fingers. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're okay." People gathered, cameras came out. A barista from the bakery crossed the street with wide eyes. "Did you see that?" someone said. She jumped into traffic. "Bathe that kid." She came out of nowhere. Layla barely heard them. She was focused on the small body in her arms, the rise and fall of his chest. He was crying hard now, confused, terrified, alive. Then, a black SUV tore around the corner and screeched to a stop. The door flew open before the driver had even fully parked. A tall man in a gray tailored coat leapt out, his tie half-tied, eyes wild with panic. The boy's head snapped up. "Daddy!" He ran from Layla's arms and into the man's. Julian Crane dropped to his knees on the pavement, pulling the boy into a desperate hug. His hands ran over the child's back, face, arms, checking for injuries, whispering something too soft for Layla to hear. Layla pushed herself up slowly, brushing gravel from her hands. Her elbows stung, her knees were scraped. Then Julian's eyes met hers. Sharp, intense. Not grateful, yet suspicious, curious, protective. "You pulled him out of the street?" he asked. Layla nodded. He was heading into traffic. "I didn't think." "You didn't have to," he cut in, standing. "You just moved." He studied her, then, clothes tattered, face streaked with soot, eyes clear. "Who are you?" Layla hesitated. "No one." Julian shook his head. "You're not no one." She shifted awkwardly, glancing toward the alley. She didn't want attention, didn't want cameras. "You just saved my son's life," he said, voice tight. "Anyone would have—" He interrupted. "They wouldn't have." The boy peeked around Julian's leg. "She was fast, Daddy, like a superhero." Julian knelt beside Layla now. "At least let me thank you properly." "You just did." But he didn't move. Neither did she. And the city kept spinning around them, oblivious that something irreversible had just shifted. 28. Julian stood slowly, still shielding his son, his gaze fixed on Layla. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Layla blinked. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." She glanced down. The skin on her elbow had split open. A slow trickle of red ran toward her wrist. "It's nothing." But the crowd was still watching. She could feel their eyes like static against her skin. Phones were still out. A woman whispered something, probably wondering who she was, what a homeless girl was doing near their precious Upper East Side. Julian turned to his driver. "Get the first aid kit." The man returned moments later, and Julian handed Layla antiseptic and gauze. She flinched as she cleaned the scrape. Eli watched her with wide, watery eyes. "You were really brave," he said softly. Layla looked at him and smiled. "You're the brave one. You didn't even cry when the cars came." "Cried after," Eli whispered. "But you held me." Julian's jaw clenched. "What's your name?" "That's it. It's all you need to know." He stared at her, brows furrowing. "You saved my son. That means I need to know a lot more." She stepped back. "I don't need anything from you." Julian didn't move. "I'm not offering charity, I'm offering decency." That word, decency, hit her harder than expected. He extended a card. "If you won't come with us now, fine, but if you need food, shelter, anything, call me." She stared at the name embossed in gold. Julian Crane, CEO, Crane Innovations. The name meant nothing to her, but everything to everyone else. "I don't belong in your world," Layla said. Julian lowered his voice. "You just changed my world." He scooped Eli into his arms. "Come on, buddy." Eli looked back at her. "Will I see you again?" Layla didn't answer. She turned and walked toward her alley, back to her corner behind the bakery. She sat behind the dumpster, pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and listened to the city settle again. But this time, something was different. An hour passed, then two. A knock on the brick wall startled her. She tensed. It was the barista from the bakery. She knelt, holding out a paper bag. "The guy said you might still be here. He paid for a week's worth of meals, said you'd probably argue, so he asked us not to tell you until we handed you the first one." Layla frowned. "He really did that?" The girl nodded. "He said it wasn't about pity. Said you looked hungry and heroic." Layla took the bag slowly. The smell of fresh croissants made her dizzy. The barista hesitated, then added, "He also left a blanket. It's in the back. Cashmere. Probably costs more than my rent." Layla chuckled under her breath. "Course it does." Later that night, she stared at Julian's card under the flicker of a street lamp. His words echoed, "You just changed my world." She thought of Eli's tiny arms around her neck, the warmth of the croissant in her hands, the scrape on her elbow, the crowd, the silence after the scream. She hadn't asked for this, but it had found her anyway. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a quiet question stirred. What now? The next morning, Layla didn't expect to see the black SUV waiting by the curb, but there it was, gleaming like it didn't know how to get dusty. Julian stepped out, suited and sure, but his eyes searched for her like he wasn't used to being uncertain. "I meant it," he said quietly. "About my son. He barely slept last night, kept asking if the lady who saved him was okay." Layla folded her arms. "He's just a kid. He'll forget." Anshin said, "Eli doesn't forget kindness. Neither do I." She didn't answer, just glanced at the bakery behind her. The barista gave her a small wave through the window. Julian held out the back door. "One night, just come with us." She wanted to say no. She almost did. But when Eli poked his head out the window, face lighting up, all her defenses crumbled. "Layla," he squealed. She sighed. "Fine. One night." The drive uptown was quiet. Layla pressed her face to the window, watching the buildings grow taller, the sidewalks cleaner, the people colder. Then the mansion appeared, gated, golden, surrounded by perfect hedges. It looked more like a museum than a home. When they pulled up, a butler opened the car door. A maid stood by the steps, frowning as Layla stepped out in her torn jeans and threadbare hoodie. Julian said nothing, only led them inside. Eli grabbed her hand like she was the one thing keeping him steady. Inside, chandeliers sparkled like they had their own gravity. Marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Layla felt like dirt under a microscope. Julian's voice broke the silence. "This is your room." He opened a door to a soft, cream-colored suite. A queen bed, a silk robe, a view of the entire city. Layla stood at the threshold like it might bite her. "You sure you want me sleeping in a place like this?" Julian's eyes flicked to her elbow, still bandaged. "I'm sure." That night, over dinner, the staff whispered. She caught snatches of it. "Is she here? Smells like cigarettes." Saved the boy. "So what?" Julian heard them too. He didn't say a word, but his fork hit the plate a little harder. His stare lingered longer than before. Later, as she stepped into the hallway, she heard a soft voice from Eli's bedroom. "Teddy, you buzzed?" Aside, there was silence. Layla's heart twisted. Julian's voice was soft. "Some people get left behind, Eli, but that doesn't mean they're less." Eli whispered, "Can Miss Layla stay forever?" Julian didn't answer. The next morning, she found him waiting by the kitchen island, a cup of black coffee in his hand. "I have a proposal," he said. Layla raised an eyebrow. "You want to adopt me too?" Julian smirked. "Barely. Not quite. Eli needs someone steady. Not a nanny, not a therapist, just someone real." Elephant in the room, Patrick Smith. She folded her arms. "And you think that's me?" "I think it already is." She hesitated. "I'm not staying unless I get to leave whenever I want. No fancy clothes, no strings." "Contracts," Julian said. "Just honesty." Layla stared at him. "I'm not your charity project," she said. Julian looked her dead in the eyes. "I've never met anyone less like a project." Layla agreed to stay for 3 days, just 3. Long enough to ease Eli's nerves, not long enough to fall into something she didn't belong to. That was the deal, she told herself. But even as she unpacked the small bundle of clothes from her backpack into drawers that smelled like lavender, something unfamiliar bloomed in her chest. Warmth? Or worse? On her second morning, she wandered into the kitchen and found a tray waiting. Toast, jam, a perfect omelet. She blinked. Did the food fairy leave this? Julian walked in, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "I cooked." Layla gave him a look. "You, Mr. Crane?" "Capable of toast," he replied dryly, "and omelets." She sat, hesitant, then took a bite. Her eyes widened. "Okay, fine. That's disturbingly good." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "You keep surprising me." "I'm not here to impress anyone," Julian said, softer now. "You're just being yourself. That's rare in this house." After breakfast, Eli tugged her hand, pulling her into the backyard. The gardens were absurd, rose bushes taller than her, fountains whispering like secrets. "Watch this," Eli shouted, climbing a tree in seconds. Layla's heart stopped. "Hey, be careful." "I do this all the time," he yelled from the top. Julian appeared then, stepping out with coffee in hand. "He's part monkey." Layla's brows furrowed. "You let him do that?" Tears glazed his eyes. "Kids fall. They also get back up." She looked at him, surprised. "You're not what I expected." He smiled faintly. "Neither are you." That night, Layla was reading in the guest room when there was a knock. Eli peeked in, hair a mess, clutching a stuffed dog. "Can I sleep here?" he asked. "It's too quiet without you." Layla hesitated, then pulled back the blanket. "Just for a little bit." As he snuggled beside her, he mumbled, "I think you're my favorite person." Layla swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're a pretty cool kid, too." The third day came too fast. Layla packed her things, folded the robe and smoothed the sheets. She stood at the door, ready to walk out. Julian met her at the bottom of the stairs. "You're leaving?" he asked, voice unreadable. "To the deal," she said. 3 days?" He looked at her, quiet. "Stay longer." She shook her head. "This place, it's not me." Could be. How do I fit here? Julian stepped closer. You don't have to. That's what makes you matter here. Layla looked past him to the front door. Give me 1 more week, he said. No pressure, no promises, just stay. She didn't answer right away. But Eli's footsteps pounded down the stairs. He grabbed her hand. Don't go. And she broke. Just a little. It's more weak, she whispered. Julian smiled, slow and sincere. Thank you. As she followed them back inside, Layla felt something shift. Not just in the air, in herself. A door creaked open that she'd kept locked for years. And for the first time, she didn't run. Layla woke to the sound of soft footsteps and the scent of warm cinnamon. For a moment, she forgot where she was. No freezing concrete under her back, no rustling cardboard. Instead, a silken blanket and a golden sunbeam filtered through gauzy curtains. This was not her world, but somehow she had been allowed to borrow it for the night. In the kitchen, Aiden sat at the breakfast bar with a bowl of cereal far too fancy to be called cereal. His small face lit up the moment he saw her. "Please," he chirped. "You didn't leave." She gave a soft smile. "Didn't want to disappoint my boss." Julian appeared behind the kitchen island, coffee mug in hand. He looked less like the cold CEO from yesterday, more like a man adjusting to something unfamiliar. "He refused to eat until he saw you," Julian murmured. "And I admit, I wasn't sure you'd still be here." Layla shrugged. "I said I'd stay a few days. I keep my word." The next few days turned into a rhythm. Layla wasn't just watching Aiden, she was anchoring him. She knew when he was about to burst into tears before anyone else. She knew his bedtime stories by heart, and the shadows softening in his gaze. But the staff didn't hide their judgment. Aides whispered behind silver trays. A butler once, accidentally, handed her the employee entrance form. Still, Layla didn't flinch. She wasn't here to impress them, she was here for Aiden. And maybe, for the man who watched her like she was the only real thing in his polished world. One evening, Julian found her in the library. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children's books and Aiden's drawings. "You handle him better than most professionals I've hired," Julian said. Layla glanced up. "Experience? I have a proposition," he continued. "My assistant is taking maternity leave. I need someone. You're organized, direct, and Aiden trusts you." Layla blinked. "You want me? In your office? I want you to do well, and that you belong, and that may be beside me." She hesitated. "I barely belong in this house." "Then maybe it's the house that needs to change." She didn't answer. Not yet. That weekend, Julian hosted a private investors' brunch. Layla helped Aiden pick out a tie. She watched the guests pour into the marble foyer, suits, designer heels, polished smiles. She tried to stay out of the way until a voice rose in the hall. A man with a slick gray beard laughed too loudly. Julia's late wife had taste, shame about her death. Rumor was, he never loved her to begin with. The words cut through Layla like ice. She didn't know Julian's wife, but she saw the pain flicker across Julian's face like lightning. Without thinking, she marched forward. "You don't speak about the dead like that," she said, voice low but fierce. The man turned. "And who are you? The help?" Layla didn't flinch. "I'm someone who still believes in respect. You don't belong here, not if that's how you talk." Silence fell across the room. Then, a quiet cough, a chair shifted. Only then did Layla realize they weren't alone. The board, the investors, the entire future of Julian's company. She stepped back, heart thudding. She'd ruined it. Julian's face was unreadable as he walked toward her. "Layla," he said, voice sharp. She braced. "To speak with you. Now." He took her arm and led her down the hall. Layla kept her chin up. "I get it. I'll leave." Julian stopped walking. "You're hired. You defended the one person I never expected anyone to defend." His voice softened. "And I saw something I haven't seen in a long time." integrity. Layla stared at him, stunned. I thought I embarrassed you. You did, Julian said with a faint smile. And you reminded every person in that room that silence isn't always strength. She blinked rapidly, her throat tight. You're not just offering me this job because I yelled at your investor, are you? I'm offering it because I've seen who you are when no one's watching. That matters more than a resume. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And if you're worried this is pity, don't be. I need someone who speaks truth, even when it's inconvenient. Layla searched his face. No pity, just sincerity. I'll think about it, she finally said. Julian nodded, leaving the offer hanging in the air like an open door. That evening, Layla helped Aiden into his pajamas. He sat on his bed with a coloring book on his lap. She watched as he colored carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration. What are you working on, kiddo? He grinned and turned the page toward her. It was a picture of 3 stick figures, one tall man with spiky black hair, one little boy, and one girl with curly hair. Underneath, he'd written in crayon, me, Dad, and Layla. Her breath caught. "Do me," she whispered. Aiden nodded proudly. "You're part of us now. Daddy said so." Layla swallowed hard, brushing her thumb gently over the corner of the page. "You're something else, you know that?" The next morning, she returned to the office wing. She had a decision to make, and something in her chest told her she already had. Julian was on a call when she walked in. He paused mid-sentence when he saw her, his eyes flicking to the stack of papers she held. She dropped them gently onto his desk. "I read through the contract. You really want me as your assistant?" You replied simply, "But only if you want it too." She held his gaze. "I want it." A breath escaped him, not quite relief, not quite surprise. Then, welcome aboard. Working for Julian wasn't easy. The man was sharp, demanding, and relentless with details. But Layla matched him stride for stride. She learned quickly how he liked his presentation structured, which clients needed finesse versus fire, how to read the shift in his tone when he was near the edge of exhaustion. She brought him coffee without asking. He brought her protein bars when she forgot to eat. They argued, they laughed, they understood each other in ways that had nothing to do with background or status. One afternoon, as they reviewed quarterly figures together, Layla caught Julian watching her again, not just with curiosity, but with something warmer, something heavier. "Pretty?" she asked, half smirking. He hesitated, then said, "It's been a long time since this office felt alive." She didn't know what to say, so she reached across the table, tapped the spreadsheet with her pen, and said, "Well, let's not mess it up. We still need to balance column D." Later that night, she stepped into Aiden's room. He was asleep, clutching his stuffed giraffe. On his nightstand was the drawing again. Me, Dad, and Layla, now taped like a family portrait. She touched it gently, her eyes damp but smiling. Layla had never had a home that didn't have strings or secrets. But somehow, in the middle of marble halls and high-rise windows, between a grieving boy and a guarded man, she was becoming something she hadn't been in a long time. Maybe even loved. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe maybe she belonged. Layla had never been in Julian's study without him before. The space was elegant but worn. Leather-bound books lined the shelves, a globe stood near the window, and soft amber light fell over a desk cluttered with reports, ink pens, and coffee mugs that hadn't moved in days. She was dusting around the edges, careful not to disturb anything, when her hand brushed against a drawer left slightly ajar. Something caught her eye. It was a photo, slipped beneath a stack of old letters, half given like a secret. She pulled it out slowly. Her breath left her chest. The woman in the picture looked almost exactly like her. Same dark curls, same defined jawline, same eyes that held both strength and sorrow. But it wasn't her, it was Julian's late wife. There, smiling beside him and Aiden, on a summer lawn that no longer existed. Layla stood frozen, the photo trembling in her fingers. Was that why he had brought her in? Because she looked like someone he lost? When Julian walked in moments later, she was still standing there, holding the past. He froze. "Layla?" She turned, her voice quiet but firm. "Is this why I'm here? Because I remind you of her?" Julian closed the door behind him. "I didn't know until that night, the night you carried Aiden across the street. When I looked at you in the headlights for a second, I thought I saw her." She swallowed. "And you kept me because of that." He said quickly, "I kept you because my son laughed again, because he started drawing again, because you made this place feel like a home." She sat down hard in the chair beside his desk, staring at the woman in the photo. "You should have told me." Julian sat across from her, folding his hands. "I didn't want to cheapen it. You're not a replacement. You're your own story." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she whispered, "She was beautiful," Olivia said, "and strong, and imperfect in ways I miss every day." Layla set the photo gently back on the desk. "I'm not her." "There," he said. "You're you, and that's why you matter." The conversation left something unspoken between them, but not something broken, like a wound that needed air. Days passed, and Layla threw herself into work. Aiden was thriving. Julian seemed more present than ever. He joined breakfasts. He read bedtime stories again. But all of it came with a strange intensity, like a man racing time. Then came the night he didn't show up for dinner. Layla found him slumped over his desk, pale and sweating. "Julian," she cried, her hands on his shoulders. His eyes fluttered open, weak. "It's just stress. I didn't eat." "You idiot," she whispered fiercely, dialing for help with trembling fingers. "You're going to the hospital." At the ER, doctors ran tests and hooked him up to IVs. It wasn't a heart attack, but the toll of months, maybe years, of pushing too hard, too long. Layla paced outside his room when a sharply dressed woman approached. "You're Miss Layla?" she asked. Layla nodded warmly. "From Julian's legal team. I thought you should know. You're listed in his will." Layla blinked. "I'm what?" The woman handed her a sealed folder. "You're named as the contingency guardian for Aiden, should anything ever happen." The folder nearly slipped from her hands. "Why me?" A voice came from behind her. "Julian." "Because," he said softly, leaning weakly on a nurse, "you'd never leave him behind." Layla turned, her chest aching with the weight of everything she didn't know, everything she might lose, everything she might already love. Layla didn't know how long she stood there in that sterile hallway, folder clutched to her chest like a lifeline. The words contingency guardian echoed in her ears like a vow she'd never signed but somehow already lived. Julian was still pale when they brought him home, his gait slower, the lines around his eyes deeper. But when Aiden ran into his arms, shrieking, "Daddy!" with a joy that rattled the quiet halls, something in Julian steadied. Later that evening, Layla sat by the fireplace, the will folder still unopened beside her. Julian entered, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one, then sat, exhaling like the weight of the world had finally pressed him into the cushions. "You're angry," he said, not looking at her. "I'm confused," she replied. "Why didn't you tell me?" He turned toward the flames. "Because I knew what you'd say. That I was overstepping, that you never signed up for this." "You are right," she murmured. Julian finally met her eyes. "But you haven't left." Layla stared down into her tea. "Because he called me Mama once when he was half asleep." Julian didn't speak for a long time. Then, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "I heard him." She looked up sharply, helping her. He added, "Correct him," he added, because it didn't feel wrong. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or strained. It was the kind that wrapped around 2 people learning to breathe in a new kind of air. "Takes a while." "Me, Julian?" she asked softly. "Really, not the legal answer, the real one." He didn't hesitate. "Because you came from nothing and still give like you have everything. Because when people see you, they see dirt. But Aiden sees safety, and I see grace." Layla swallowed hard, emotion thick in her throat. I'm not polished. I mess up. I don't belong in this world. Julian shook his head. You belong wherever love is real. The fire crackled between them, warm and steady. Later that night, she finally opened the folder. The documents were straightforward. If anything happened to Julian, Layla would become Aiden's legal guardian. There was a trust set aside for the boy and another for her. But what shook her most wasn't the money, it was the handwritten letter folded inside. It wasn't legalese, it was Julian's heart on paper. I don't know how long I'll have my health, it read, but I know who I want near my son if I can't be. You gave him laughter, you gave me back my breath. If you're reading this, I hope you said yes. Tears blurred the ink. Layla folded it back up and held it against her chest like a prayer. The next morning, Aiden tugged at her hand during breakfast. Are you going to stay forever now? He asked. Layla knelt to his level, brushing his hair from his forehead. Stay as long as you want me. He grinned and wrapped his arms around her neck, then forever. Julian watched from across the room, his hand gripping his cane, his mouth slightly parted like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Or maybe, what he was finally allowing himself to hope for. Later that afternoon, as Layla returned to the study to finish cleaning, Julian stopped her in the hallway. I never thought I'd feel safe again, he said. Layla paused. And now? He looked at her like she was the miracle he never asked for, but somehow got anyway. Aluna said, he whispered, I want to live like I deserve what you see in me. She didn't answer with words. She just reached for his hand and didn't let go. The headlines hit the internet like wildfire. Homeless woman named in billionaire's will. From the street to the study. Who is Layla? Layla stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the TV screen in Julian's media room. Her photo, an older one from when she slept on cardboard and collected half-eaten sandwiches, flashed across every major network. Every news anchor speculated about her. Was she a con artist, a secret lover, a hidden relative? None of them knew the truth. Julian stormed into the room, phone to his ear, voice taut with fury. I said, shut it down. Pull every story before noon or I'll sue every outlet you own. He hung up and turned to Layla, breath ragged. I didn't want this. Layla nodded slowly, arms crossed tightly against her chest. But it's happened? He looked at her, really looked. The fear in her eyes wasn't for herself, it was for Aiden. The board called an emergency meeting, Julian said quietly. They think I've lost control. They want to know why you're in my will. Then tell them, Layla said, chin trembling. Tell them I'm the woman who saves kids from traffic and reads bedtime stories when your voice breaks halfway through. Julian stepped closer. They don't care about heart, just headlines. The words stung. Later that evening, Layla sat in the garden swing while Aiden slept. She clutched a wrinkled article in her hand, one the tabloids had found and reposted. Teen runaway, found sleeping in bus terminal. Her name had been redacted then. Not anymore. Julian found her there in the moonlight. You don't have to do this, he said softly. If you want to go somewhere safe, private, I'll send you tonight. She didn't look up. You think I'd leave Aiden? He said, kneeling beside her, but I wouldn't blame you if you did. Her jaw tightened. You said you'd protect me. Layla reached into her coat and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. 2 children, herself, aged 13, and a boy no older than 6, standing outside a foster home. It was Josh, she whispered. My little brother. Julian slowly sat beside her. Upped into the system after our mom overdosed. I was always with him. Always. Her voice cracked. Then one day they said a couple wanted to adopt him. Just him. Julian's eyes darkened. They split you up? I ran away that night, got caught. They said I was unstable, dangerous. I never saw Josh again. Silence stretched. I used to dream I'd find him again. Maybe he was adopted by kind people. Maybe he still remembered me. A tear slid down her cheek. But I don't know. I lost him, and part of me never forgave myself. Julian's hand brushed hers. You were a child. No one should have let that happen. Layla looked at him then, broken and brave all at once. I became nothing, no one, until I met Aiden, until I walked into your world. He exhaled slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter, the edges yellowed with time. Wife Ilara. She wrote this before she died. I found it after the funeral. Layla unfolded the paper gently. The handwriting was delicate, swirling. Anything ever happens to me, don't grieve in silence. Build something in my name, something for the lost girls, the ones with no homes, no hands to hold. Promise me you'll make them feel seen. Layla clutched the letter to her chest. She was talking about me. Julian nodded. Maybe this isn't a scandal. Maybe this is fate. Tears pooled in Layla's eyes. Maybe it is. Is moved aside. The next morning, Julian's mansion was surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras. Security had tripled. Inside, the tension was thick, especially when a member of the corporate board arrived unannounced. Mr. Crane, the woman said curtly. A word? Julian led her into the study. Layla stayed just out of sight but close enough to hear. We're facing shareholder panic, the board member said. Your personal life is now a liability. They want a formal review of your mental competency and a full audit of the will you updated. 10 minutes later, I'm not incapacitated, Julian said calmly, and my will stands. A homeless woman as guardian to your heir. He's not homeless anymore, Julian replied, voice steel. She's part of this family. Outside the door, Layla's heart pounded. Julia, the woman continued, softer now, this isn't about appearances, it's about stability. You have a duty. Julian didn't flinch. My duty is to Aiden, and he sleeps through the night because of her. The woman shook her head and walked out without another word. That night, Layla sat beside Julian in the study, watching Aiden draw another family picture. This time, he included himself, his dad, and her smiling, holding hands. Sit down and wait for your money, she said quietly. No, Julian replied. To used you. Too. She turned toward him, eyes shimmering. Then tell me what the truth is. Julian looked down at the floor for a long moment, then lifted his gaze. I was sinking before I met you, he said. I had everything, money, companies, staff, but I came home to silence. Aiden cried in his sleep. I stopped talking to people. I let the world think I was managing because pretending was easier. Layla blinked back a tear. Didn't one day, he went on, this girl in a tattered coat threw herself into traffic to save my son, and suddenly the world made noise again. She tried to look away, but he gently touched her hand. You didn't just save Aiden, you saved me too. Layla's breath caught. I wrote you into the will because I trust you more than anyone I've ever hired, known, or loved. She shook her head, overwhelmed. Julian, I never asked for it. No. That's why you're the only one who deserves it. Silence lingered before Julian stood and crossed to his desk. He pulled out a thick folder, legal papers, notarized and ready. "'Twas this. Foundation, he said, in Ilara's name, for girls like you, for lost siblings, for second chances. Layla opened the file and gasped. Her name was listed as co-director. I want you to run it with me, he said, or without me. If I collapse tomorrow, I want you standing in front of that board, not backing away from it. Her eyes searched his. What if they hate me? And we make them watch you rise? Tears spilled freely now. A soft knock interrupted them. Aiden peeked in, holding a blanket. Layla, he said sleepily, can you tuck me in? She smiled through tears. As she followed the boy down the hall, Julian whispered after her, You're not the girl they found on the street. You're the reason I believe in beginnings again. Layla paused at the doorway, turned back, and said the words that had been building since the day he opened his door to her. I'm not leaving, Julian, not until I've built something that lasts. And he smiled, relieved, humbled, and full of something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. The courtroom buzzed with whispers the moment Layla stepped inside. Reporters lined the back row. Flashbulbs exploded like tiny betrayals. Julian Crane sat beside her, his jaw tight, his usually polished demeanor now tense with something raw, fear maybe. Not for himself, but for her. The board of Crane Holdings had filed a lawsuit to challenge Julian's will and remove Layla from any guardianship or financial power. Their claim? Manipulation. Exploitation. That she, a homeless woman, had preyed on a grieving widower and a vulnerable child. Layla wore a borrowed dress, her shoes pinched, but she held her head high despite the stares. The opposing counsel didn't waste time. "Miss Layla Bennett, is it true you had no permanent address at the time you were brought into Mr. Crane's home?" Layla said clearly. "You were in fact sleeping in a cardboard shelter? You've never held a formal job in corporate structure, nor have a college degree. Yet, somehow, you became the named contingency guardian of a billionaire's child." Julian tensed beside her, but Layla's voice remained steady. "Not so how. I loved him, and I earned his trust." The lawyer scoffed. "Or you calculated your way into his will." Julian stood up abruptly. "Objection." The judge frowned. "Mr. Crane, you're not counsel." "Understand, Your Honor, but I will be taking the stand today." Gasps rippled across the room. After a short recess, Aiden was brought in, too small for the space, but fiercely brave in his little suit. His feet didn't even touch the floor as he sat in the witness chair. The judge leaned down gently. "Do you know why you're here, Aiden?" "Pure, to tell the truth." "What do you want the court to know?" Aiden looked straight at the board of directors. "Layla is my home." A murmur swept the room. "She reads with me every night. She makes me laugh like Mommy used to. When I have nightmares, she's there. And Daddy? He smiles now. He used to not smile at all." The judge cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Thank you, Aiden. That was very brave." Then it was Julian's turn. He walked slowly to the stand, his gait unsteady but his voice clear. "I understand why this lawsuit was filed. It seems impossible that a man like me, wealthy, powerful, would trust someone like Layla. But the truth is, I didn't choose her out of desperation. I chose her out of hope." The courtroom stilled. Could be battling a rare heart disorder. "I didn't want to burden my son with secrets, but he deserves transparency. If I were to pass unexpectedly, I needed someone who loved him as her own. Layla didn't just walk into our lives, she ran into traffic to save my child. And when I gave her every reason to walk away, she stayed." One board member leaned forward. "So you're admitting she was named due to your medical condition?" Julian shook his head. "No. She was named because she gave me something worth dying for. My son's laughter." Layla blinked hard, heart thudding. The judge called a brief recess to deliberate. She sat on the bench outside the courtroom, trying to catch her breath. The smears in the press, the accusations, the pressure, it had all come to this moment. Julian sat beside her, silent. Then gently, he reached over and took her hand. "You didn't have to fight for me," she whispered. "I didn't," he said. "I fought for the truth." She squeezed his hand tightly. The court reconvened within the hour, but for Layla it felt like a lifetime. Every second echoed with doubt, fear, and the soft squeeze of Julian's hand still lingering on her palm. "Rise," the bailiff called. The judge, an older man with weathered eyes, adjusted his glasses and glanced around the room. "The court has reviewed all evidence, testimonies, and legal precedents. The matter at hand is not one of wealth, but of intent. Guardianship is not bestowed based on bloodlines or bank account, but trust, care, and character." He looked directly at Layla. "It is clear to this court that Miss Bennett's actions have been consistent with love, protection, and loyalty. The court upholds the will as written. Ms. Layla Bennett remains the named contingency guardian of Aiden Crane." A stunned silence filled the room. Layla didn't move. She couldn't. It took a full breath to break the silence before she realized what had just happened. Julian turned to her slowly. "It's over," he said softly. "You did it." But Layla shook her head, eyes welling. No, we did. Behind them, Aiden broke into a wide grin. Told you, Daddy, told you she's magic. Julian laughed, genuinely. Not the curated chuckles he gave shareholders or the polite nods at galas. This one was real. And Layla, still trembling, laughed too. The board members filtered out quietly, their accusations dissolved under the weight of testimony and truth. The media outside exploded in a storm of flashes and shouts. But inside the courtroom, everything stood still. Just three people holding on to one another in the wreckage of a battle they never asked for. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Layla stood in the kitchen making grilled cheese sandwiches, still in her courtroom dress, barefoot now. Eden sat at the counter drawing with a crayon. Julian leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them both. You know, he said, I've made a lot of speeches in my life. Boardrooms, press conferences, IPO launches, but nothing has ever felt like today. Layla glanced over. You scared me. Scared me too, he admitted. She plated Aiden's sandwich and set it down in front of him, ruffling his hair. Then she turned to Julian. Why didn't you tell me about your heart condition earlier? I didn't want pity. Layla nodded, and I didn't want to be someone's rescue project. You weren't, he said gently. You became someone's reason. Her breath caught. Julian? He stepped forward. Layla, you didn't just fight beside me, you fought for Aiden. You fought for this family before you even realized it was one. Tears stung her eyes. I don't have a perfect past. Neither do I, he said, but the future, it's starting to look a lot like hope. In the quiet that followed, Aiden held up his drawing. 3 stick figures under a sun with the word home written above. Can we frame this? He asked. Layla knelt beside him. Only if you sign it. He scribbled in his name proudly, then turned to Julian. Can she be my mom now? Layla's hand went to her mouth, trembling. Julian didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee beside them. The city skyline glowed in the fading light, streaked with hues of orange and lavender as evening fell over the rooftops. Layla stood at the edge of a familiar building, one she'd once called home. A flattened cardboard box still lay nearby, like a fragile memory. She hadn't returned here in months, not since her life had changed overnight. But tonight, Julian had asked her to meet him here. She turned when she heard footsteps. Julian emerged from the stairwell, slightly winded from the climb but smiling. He didn't wear a tailored suit or bring bodyguards or extravagance. Just a black sweater, the sleeves pushed up, and a quiet nervousness in his eyes that Layla had never seen before. After you forgot, she teased gently, tucking her hands in her coat. Julian approached slowly, stopping right where the moonlight hit her face. How could I ever forget the place where my future started? Layla tilted her head, curious. Your future? He reached into his pocket, not with flourish, but like a man who understood the value of simple things. I know it's not a rooftop restaurant or a yacht or Paris, Julian began, voice shaking slightly, but this is where I first saw you. Right here, with nothing but courage and a broken smile. You had nothing in your pockets, Layla, but you gave everything to a little boy you didn't know. She felt her throat tighten. Julian stepped closer. Now, I want to give you everything I have. He opened the velvet box. Inside sat a delicate gold band with a single sapphire, simple, luminous, and deep like her eyes. The city buzzed beneath them, but all Layla heard was the beat of her own heart. I don't want a fairy tale, he said. I want a life with you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled before she could speak. Her hands flew to her mouth as she nodded, again and again. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Julian. Yes. He slipped the ring on her finger with trembling hands, and she laughed through tears as he kissed her knuckles. Around them, the wind danced like applause. Later that week, the wedding was held in Julian's garden. Modest, intimate, just close friends and a few brave petals scattered by the breeze. Aiden stood proudly as the best man, beaming in a little suit too big for his frame. Layla wore a dress that wasn't designer. It had no label, no press coverage. But it was perfect. A soft ivory satin, simple neckline, lace sleeves. She looked like the kind of bride who had walked through fire to get to the aisle. When the music paused and it was her turn to speak, Layla stepped forward, holding Julian's hands. "I used to think I was invisible," she began, voice shaking, "a girl who belonged to alleyways and forgotten corners. But then, love found me. Not in a ballroom, not in a fairy tale, on a sidewalk, on a rooftop, in a little boy's arms." She looked at Aiden and smiled. "You two didn't just change my life, you gave me one." Julian's eyes glistened as he lifted her hands, pressing a soft kiss to her fingertips. When it was his turn, he took a breath and looked around, at the small gathering of people who had seen him through storms and silence, at the boy clutching his teddy bear and grinning wide, and finally, at the woman who had turned his world right side up. "I once believed that some wounds were too deep to heal," Julian began quietly. "I thought love was something that left when you needed it most. I buried my heart with my late wife and convinced myself that I couldn't feel again." He turned toward Layla. "Then you showed up, barefoot on a rooftop, fire in your eyes, defiance in your spine. You didn't ask for anything, you just gave. You made my son laugh again. You made me believe again." A hush fell over the guests. "I found my future in a girl with holes in her shoes," he said, voice cracking with emotion. "And I promise, no matter how long or how hard this road may be, I will never stop choosing you." Layla's tears flowed freely. Behind them, Aiden wiped his own cheeks, then walked up and tugged their hands together. "Can we be a family now?" he whispered. Layla knelt and pulled him into her arms. "We already are." The officiant smiled, barely holding back emotion. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Julian, you may kiss your bride." The kiss wasn't showy or cinematic. It was slow, reverent, a kiss between two people who had crawled through the ruins of their pasts to stand in the light. As they kissed, petals began to fall from the rooftop, above twists gently by staff and friends. Layla once thought hated her. Someone had told them her story. Someone had told them the truth. A laughter broke out as Aiden ran around catching petals mid-air. The guests clapped, not because of the wealth or power, but because of the love that pulsed visibly between them. Later that evening, Layla returned alone to the rooftop where Julian had proposed. The cardboard was gone, replaced with a small bench engraved with her name. On it was a brass plaque that read, "From this roof, the world changed. Here, love found a heartbeat again." Julian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him. "You did all this?" "Wanted you to know," he said, lips brushing her ear, "that where you came from will never be forgotten, because that girl on the roof, she saved us both." She turned and kissed him again, slow and certain. Beneath them, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. But up here, where once there was only concrete and cold, there was now warmth, family, love, and in Julian's embrace, Layla finally understood. She wasn't rescued. She was chosen. And this life, this legacy, this rooftop was no longer a place of survival. It was home. The morning sun cast a golden hue across the quiet grounds of the new community shelter, its name etched into a white stone wall, the Evelyn House. Below the title, in soft cursive, were the words, "A place where second chances begin." Layla stood beneath it, her hand resting gently on her belly, now round with new life. Julian stood beside her, his hand covering hers. Aiden bounced nearby, holding a sign he'd made with crayons and crooked letters. "Grand opening today. Free hugs." The shelter was more than a building. It was a promise. When Layla proposed naming it after Evelyn Juliet's wife, he had hesitated, surprised, but she had explained, softly. "She dreamed of a home for women like me. I may be the hands building it, but it was her heart that imagined it first. This isn't replacing her, this is honoring her." Julian had pulled her into a tearful embrace. "You are everything she hoped the world would still have." The ribbon cutting drew city council members, local press, former shelter residents, and women still struggling to find footing. Some carried babies, and some just carried babies, and some just came for the coffee and warmth, but all were welcomed. Inside, there were rows of cozy beds, murals of sunlight painted by volunteers, and a corner Aiden named the kindness spot, where people could leave notes, poems, or small acts of hope. Julian, now CEO of his philanthropic foundation, stood in front of a modest podium. 3 years ago, he began, I lost the love of my life. I thought that was the end of something. But someone taught me that love doesn't end, it transforms. He looked at Layla, his eyes soft. The woman saved my son's life, and then, without knowing it, she saved mine. Today, we honor Evelyn, but we also honor every Layla, every woman who was told she was too broken to build, every girl who was overlooked. Aiden tugged on his father's blazer. Julian smiled, lowered the microphone, and helped him up. Aiden cleared his throat. We made up a saying, for the shelter and the foundation. It's, kindness begins with one. Like, just one person, you know? Applause echoed warmly. Layla, seated in the front row, pressed her hand over her heart. Later that night, in their quiet home, Julian walked into the nursery, where Layla was folding tiny pink onesies. On the shelf was a framed drawing Aiden had made. 3 hands, one large and rough, one tiny and round in the center. Layla turned the frame toward Julian. That's us, she whispered. The 3 of us. And soon, 4. Julian walked behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pressed his chin to her shoulder. Still don't understand how you do it, he murmured. Layla smiled. What? Turn pain into purpose. She rested her head against his, because pain is where people stop, but it's also where the right ones begin. Their daughter was born just after midnight in late spring. They named her Hope. The moment Layla held her close, she whispered, Your brother drew this for you before you were even born. She held up the framed drawing again, tracing the lines with her fingertip. See that? That's how we hold each other up. A few months later, the city air turned crisp again, the same season when Layla had once slept on sidewalks, clutching a frayed blanket and praying for silence over safety. Now, with a baby on her hip and her son holding her hand, she walked those familiar blocks, not with fear, but with purpose. Julian had stayed back at home, letting her have this walk alone. He knew what it meant. She passed the bakery where she used to sit behind the dumpsters, inhaling the scent of bread she couldn't afford. She passed the bus bench where she'd once curled up behind a cardboard sign. Her steps slowed when she reached the alley where she had first heard the scream that changed her life. That day, that child, that choice. She stood there for a long time. Then, just a few feet away, she saw someone, young woman, shivering in an oversized hoodie, eyes wide with hunger and fear. It was like looking into a mirror from the past. Layla knelt down, gently shifted Hope into one arm, and unzipped her bag. She pulled out a soft blanket, the same kind they handed out at Evelyn House. She draped it over the girl's shoulders. The woman blinked. Why are you helping me? Layla's voice was quiet but steady. Because someone once saw me when I was invisible. The girl swallowed hard. Do you work for a shelter or something? Layla smiled. I helped build one. The girl reached for the baby, eyes softening. She's beautiful. Layla looked at Hope and nodded. She is. So is yours. You just don't know her name yet. She helped the young woman to her feet, took her hand, and guided her toward the direction of Evelyn House. Behind them, Aiden skipped along the sidewalk, dragging a red wagon filled with sandwiches, juice boxes, and hand-knit scarves. As they walked, Layla thought about the name she now carried. Layla Crane. It still felt unreal at times, not because of the wealth or the titles, but because of the legacy it now held. She hadn't just married into a powerful name, she'd helped redefine it. That name now stood for second chances, for love born on sidewalks, for laughter rising in dining rooms that once echoed with silence. Later that night, Layla stood beside Julian at their bedroom window. The lights of the city twinkled below them. Julian slipped an arm around her. "You're quiet." She nodded. "I walked the old route today. Gave away one of the last blankets. I met someone who reminded me how easy it is to fall and how rare it is to be caught." Julian leaned down and kissed her temple. "You caught me too, Layla. Don't ever forget that." She closed her eyes, holding that truth like an ember. Across the room, Aiden was asleep in a pile of comic books. Hope stirred gently in her crib. The home was full, not with things, but with people, purpose, and peace. Layla turned back to the window one last time. In the glass, her reflection merged with the city outside. Her scars still lingered, but so did her strength. As the clock ticked toward midnight, her voice whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Sometimes saving a life isn't a miracle. It's a beginning." It had only just begun.